Now we're going to look at how to send data from the UI to our .NET model. And from there, we'll do something with it, manipulate it somehow in our code behind, and then send it back up into Angular. And I think that's going to be one of the more common interactions between Angular and .NET. Because without Angular, a lot of the times what .NET developers do is use jQuery or straight JavaScript to interact with their code behind. And I think Angular simplifies a lot of that interaction on the client side and makes it easier to interact with .NET. So for that, what I'm going to do is add a UI element. I'm going to add a button here. This is going to be a submit button. And I am going to put a model in the submit button, just like we put a model here on our input field. So this is going to be a type of submit, and I am going to use a new directive, and this is going to be an ng click. So I'll just do ng click equals, and then whatever name that I want to give my method. This is going to be an Angular method, and that's going to be called update. Now, I am going to pass our model, which is this one, into this method. So I'm going to do input data. What I'm doing is I'm going to capture my data, whatever I type in, I'm going to capture into this model, and then whenever I click this button, I'll trigger this update, and I'll send my parameter. So I'll send whatever I just typed in back to Angular. And I'll just do value is update, and that's it. I'll put a break here. And when we come back, we'll send back to this string right here, some string. So I'll just save that. And then I'll go into my controller, my .NET controller, and I'll create my method. So what I want here is going to be just my .NET method to process this. This is going to be an action result again, and it's going to be called update data, to not be confused with our update on the client side. So this would be just a string, and I'll call it P1, and then we'll do our body. And in here, what I want is, let's see, I'll create a generic variable, updated data, and that's going to equal P1 plus, let's see here, I'm going to add some text to this parameter so we'll know what happened. And I think I want to interact with the employee object, but let's see, update successful, and I'll put hyphens there. And now what I can do is create a response. So this right here is could be more elaborate. I'm just going to kind of mimic what might go on though. And to do that, I'm going to change the name of the employee to Jane Doe. So now we can clearly see that there was a change. What I want to do is add another property, and I'm going to send back this data here so we can see that as well. So for this, I'll just do extra, string extra, and that's that. And go back to my controller. Now I need to add my parameter to extra. And all this is doing is letting me see that I did in fact manipulate the data sent into this method. And so now we're going to do a return. Here's where we got to send back as JSON, and we're going to send back our response. This method is going to be a get, and so what I want is allow get. All right, so what we're doing is this is the method we're getting from our UI. We're appending a string to it, assigning it here, and then assigning it here into our model and completely manipulating this employee model. and then we send that back in this response. I could have just put all of this right here, but I want to put it in this variable, kind of clean it up a little bit, make it easier to read, and then I send it back. And then we're going to allow this method to be a get, so we're putting this explicit restriction on it and sending that back as JSON so that Angular can read it. Then in our layout, we need to do a little bit of processing here. Looks like I might have a missing tag, so let's see, I think that is it. I'm just going to run this real quick to make sure I don't have an error somewhere. Alright, so that all looks good. I'll keep that running because I'm just going to be right here inside of Angular. All my .NET code is now compiled. So what I want to do is create a function for this update. This is the name we're using, and I am going to assign a function to that. And I'm going to do my parameter that I'm passing in. And then I'm going to do HTTP. All right, let's talk about this HTTP first. This is an Angular service. And Angular has a number of these kind of, you can think of them like utilities that help us do certain things in Angular. And to gain access to this utility, I need this HTTP. So before we just had this scope, and I've added this HTTP right here. And there are a number of these services, but right now we're just going to talk about this one. And it's going to allow me to send back my data that I'm getting from this model through the way that we've accessed it from Angular. And one thing about these services, they can be modified to do other things. So you can actually extend this HTTP. But with .NET, I think a lot of that you can do easier in the code behind. So we're not really going to worry about that in this course. And now what I want to do is I'm going to make this so that it's a little easier to read. I've got my URL, and I'm going to do my URL that this is getting accessed on, update data. So that's our method and our code behind. There's our parameter, and this is going to equal P1, like that. And now I'm going to do method. This is going to be a get, and I'm going to close this, and then I'm going to say success. And this is going to trigger if, in fact, everything went well. Everything, there was no errors in the processing of this. This is the method we get, the variable that we get back is this data method. And in here, what I want to do is scope some string, not something, some string, equals data. So I'm going to assign our method that comes from the back end to our model on the front end. So we're overriding this one. And this only triggers if we have a successful operation. And now I need to close that. Might have one too many of these in here. That one I think I can take out and do that, but we'll see if that works. And I'm going to try to do a breakpoint here, try to do something here, and give this a test. Make sure I've got it all saved. Yes, so let's try that. Okay, so far so good. From the UI, and there we go. Now we can see Angular is correctly identifying our method, and we're sending our data back to it, and this is our updated data. So you can see the appended string is on this as well. And there's our response. It's got our employee model. There's our string again. There's our new name. So far so good. Just walk through this. And there we go. Now we can go ahead and break this down a little bit better so that we are assigning the name, the first name and the last name. And to do that, let's see here. I want to go back to my layout, and we can say something like employee model and see what happens with that. Now, some string is not going to change this time. Well, let me update because we just changed our code. And then I'll do from the UI update. So you can see here, Jane changed and Doe changed. This stayed the same, obviously. I could also do this, scope some string equals data. And now we'll get that entire piece back into there. I could just actually extra. I think that will work. Give that a run from the UI. Yes. So we did our trick again with accessing the model directly by calling extra. So you can still use that just as we used it on the UI with our employee model when we were doing this and this. So there you go. Now we've got full communication from Angular to the back end. We're able to process anything back here. Of course, this can be quite elaborate with any kind of back-end code processing. We transform into JSON the response and go ahead and send it back. It comes through our Angular and then goes back up into our UI. And all we had to do was our ng click to call our Angular update method. We passed in our model, which is this model, and that triggered the call. And that's a round trip from Angular to .NET and back up into Angular.